Hello guys, if you don't know us, I'm Paige.
I'm Kim.
And we decided to do a study on the associations of virtual reality metrics and self-reported well-being with injury occurrences among high school athletes. So there are no disclosures, so there's no financial or other commercial interest to disclose at this time. So for our background, here are some previous studies that support what our research is kind of going into and what we want to introduce. So in the previous studies, we have discovered that reducing injury risk also, obviously starts with identifying or pointing out who's at risk of being injured to begin with. So that is what the first bullet point is talking about. And then the second bullet point is explaining that we found that there are if you have a slow reaction time, it increases the chances of you having an injury occurrence when you're participating in sport. And then also the chances of concussion. So concussion was also found to be a strong relation to slow reaction time, which is the whole body reactive movement responses. And then also evidence also supports that psychological stress, so such as mood, depression, or anything of that matter that affects the cognitive abilities, has an effect on how well the brain processes information and can also relate to the injury occurrence as well. So for our purpose, we wanted to identify any prospective association of perceptual motor function, suboptimal well-being, and or concussion history with the occurrence of core or lower extremity sprain or strain among male and female high school athletes. So for our methods, we had 68 high school athletes, we had 41 females, and we had 27 males. The reason we had more females than males was because the females came from two different high schools, both were soccer teams, and the 27 boys came from one high school as well. And for our exclusion criteria, we eliminated current injury, meaning that anyone who had a current injury before taking the VR test or any of the methods that we use, we just excluded them completely. And then we use the VR, as you know, which assesses the whole body reactive responses, which is eyes, neck, arm, and step. And then our preseason survey was the Global Wellbeing Index. And then for our injury documentation, we collaborated with these other ATs from these high schools, and they use their EMR systems to help us identify the injuries that occurred during the season, and we collected those as well. And we included any acute sprain or strain that happened during the season.
Okay, so then we've already kind of talked a little bit about the VR, but essentially this picture in the middle right there is what you see as soon as you put the headset on after it calibrates to your eyes. So you're seeing that cross in the middle, which is where you're supposed to look at. And then those green spheres are the targets on the side. So in the beginning, they drop down so you can identify what the target is. From then on, they move outside of your visual field. Thank you. And it's proportionate to your arm distance. From there, you get 40 different trials that require you to look, rotate your neck, reach, and step in order to put the controller into that target, and you get a buzz and like a little sound as feedback for that. So there's 40 different trials. They were split up in between either congruent or incongruent circles. Yeah. So the filled circle meant that you moved in the same direction as the circle was going, and the open one, which is on the bottom, you moved in the opposite direction. And those would either appear from the center of your visual field or from the left or from the right. So
essentially we had 8 different stimuli for the participants to react to.
And then here are basically what we're describing as the virtual reality measurements. So you have your perceptual latency, which is the time that it takes from when the stimulus first appeared for you to either move 6 degrees neck and eye rotation or 10 centimeters arm or step displacement. So these are kind of going to be our definitions that we're using as we move forward. And then the response time is that total movement. So after you pass that 6 degrees, 10 centimeters to the actual movement of you completing the task. And then these are all the measurements that we got. So the 40 trial mean and trial to trial intra-individual variability, which tests the consistency of which they're about of how they're doing it. So you get that then for perceptual latency, eyes, neck, arm, and step. Response time, eyes, neck, arm, and step. And then the speed accuracy was right correct score. And that takes how many that you got right divided by either the sum of the perceptual latency or the response.
Okay, so for the preseason survey, obviously we use the Global Wellbeing Index. And for the first three categories that we have, those three came from the overall wellness index. And then the last two, musculoskeletal problems and high intensity performance limitations, came from the sports fitness index. And we took those and we categorized them, and you come up with a score, and you can get a total of 10 points, which is demonstrated on the right-hand side, obviously. And you can get a total of 10 points per category, so giving you a raw score of 50 total. And then if you wanted to do it in a percentage, you can get an overall score of 100. So you're timing that 50 times 2 to get that 100, and going backwards to get that percentage. So for our injury surveillance, so we wanted to identify what the definition was for our study. So any core or lower extremity sprain or strain that was evaluated, whether they had time loss or not. So for instance, if they had a sprain or strain, it didn't matter if they were still participating or not, it's still an injury. So these were the recordings that we had for females and males, and all recording core or lower extremity injuries. And for the percentages, these were the percentages that we got among the core or lower extremity injuries of all females and males, and divided that up. And this definition, or this bullet point at the end, kind of demonstrates what we're going to be talking about later on with our cross tabulation.
So from there, we took the data and from the VR, from the overall, from the Global Wellbeing Index, and from there, concussion self-reported history. And we ran a ROC curve, and then from there did crosstab. So we were able to identify different cut points as whether or not you were at risk for an injury, or in this case, if they got injured. So this is combined. So out of the total 68, we had 20 that got injured, so male and females together. So from that point, we identified that history of sports-related concussion of 2 or more was a good predictor of core or lower extremity injury. And then arm response time average was also a good predictor. So in terms of the columns that you're looking at, we have the variables listed, the area underneath the curve, which typically about a 0.7 is a good rating for that. So you can see that we are pretty close to that on the arm response time. And then you have our cut point, which is the time that it took, in this case for arm response time. And then p-value, sensitivity, specificity, and then an odds ratio, which overall are pretty good. From there, we separated it in between males and females. So this is the males data. Out of the 27, we had 7 who got injured. For them, we noticed that the neck perceptual latency average was a better indicator of core or lower, or a better predictor, of core or lower extremity injuries. And then arm response time, again, average showed up to be a good predictor as well. You can see by our odds ratios on the very end that it's pretty significant as it goes about. And then we broke it down to the females. So the females, 13 of the 41 got injured. And what's interesting about them is that we see that history of sports-related concussion of 2 or more pop up as one of the top predictors of the core or lower extremity injuries. And then from there, it's that arm response time average. And then the Global Wellbeing Index, mood-related problems also showed up as being of having a good area underneath the curve, as well as an odds ratio. So if we kind of click back, you can notice the 1.385 seconds for the females versus the males had a 1.257. So it's quite a significant difference in terms of time, which indicated whether or not they got hurt.
Okay, so this is the cross tabulations that I was talking about before. So we broke it down for the history of concussion, 2 or more concussions related to core or lower extremity injury. So among all of the participants, we found that only 6 got hurt out of all of the participants who said that they had a history of 2 or more concussions and corollary extremity injury, which gave you a 67% incidence. And then broken down into male and female. The reason why we didn't see as many males and males for concussion of 2 or more is because we possibly think we didn't have enough males to get that that number that we wanted, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't significant. It just means that we probably didn't have enough male participants. So for females, we noticed that 5 were injured and had a history of 2 or more concussions, which gave us 83%. And for males, we had 1 who got injured and reported 2 or more concussions, and that gave us 33%. And it gave us pretty good odds ratios as well. And then this is also explaining the arm response time, which is significant among all participants. So it's broken down again, male and females and all participants. And the cut points are showing how big of a difference there was between male and female and what the average cut point was for all of them. So the cut points are explaining how fast they are, their arm is responding to the stimulus, the whole movement itself. So there was a significant difference between males and females, meaning that males were faster than females. And it gives us a 140 millisecond difference between the 2, which is highly significant. And then for the global well-being index, we noticed that the females, obviously, it was very important for them versus the males. And it showed that whoever scored a total of 7 points on category 3, which was the mood-related problems, including nervousness, anxiety, sadness, depression, irritability, and stress. If they scored 7 or more points, they were more than likely to get injured, with a 54% incidence and an odds ratio of 4.28. And for discussion, this kind of wraps up our whole our tables and everything that we talked about before. So we noticed that for sex specific, there must be some more attention to those specific genders and those specific sports. And we found that arm response time average and set response time average were among the strongest predictors of corollary extremity injury. Arm response time, as I said before, is faster in males than females. And neck perceptual latency, which is how fast you're turning your neck, is a high predictor for males. And then history of 2 or more concussions is the strongest predictor of injury among female athletes. And then obviously the global well-being, mood-related problems are also important for females as well.
And then some other key points that we wanted to kind of go over is that kind of what this boils down to is that we're looking at the cognitive aspect, which is what makes VR different. It's that processing from the initial stimuli to the motion that takes place. And so we're finding that with the brain, you can either have segregated or integrated pathways. And we're looking at how well you're able to switch in between those different stimuli that process it. So we're finding that the slowed information processing, which is reacting to that initial stimuli and then creating the movement, is putting you at risk or is a better predictor for a corollary extremity injury. And then the impaired cognitive flexibility, which is again that consistency. So how well are you able to do it in between each of those 40 trials, was also a good predictor. Yeah. And then clinical relevancy. So as Paige kind of talked about earlier, it's important to have different cut points for either males and females, and then looking at those specific areas. Was that your time? Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like wrap it up. Oh, okay. So then threw me off my game, Hog. So then we're looking at in total that to take away from this is that the virtual reality assessment of the perceptual motor function is going to be important in being able to predict those core lower extremity injuries. And again, it has to do with the brain's like connectivity of how it processes the different stimuli.
And how well the brain can revert back and change their processing if they need to, depending on what they're reacting to as well.
So I recommend this.